dog stole my chair, so I had to move. In the woods. These young rabbits must move out if they are to survive. In a wild and free state, they stray sometimes for miles, wandering until they find a suitable environment. R.M. Lockley, The Private Life of the Rabbit. It was getting on toward moonset when they left the field and entered the wood. Straggling, catching up with one another, keeping more or less together, they had wandered over half a mile down the fields, always following the course of the brook. Although Hazel guessed that they must now have gone farther from the warren than any rabbit he had ever talked to, he was not sure whether they were yet safely away, and it was while he was wondering, not for the first time, whether he could hear sounds of pursuit that he first noticed the dark masses of the trees in the brook disappearing among them. Rabbits avoid close woodland, where the ground is shady, damp and grassless, and they feel menaced by the undergrowth. Hazel did not care for the look of the trees. Still, he thought, Holly would no doubt think twice before following them into a place like that, and to keep beside the brook might well prove safer than wandering about the fields in one direction and another, with the risk of finding themselves in the end back at the warren. He decided to go straight into the wood without consulting Bigwig, and to trust that the rest would follow. If we don't run into any trouble, and the brook takes us through the wood, he thought, we really shall be clear of the warren, and then we can look for somewhere to rest for a bit. Most of them still seem to be more or less all right, but Fiver and Pipkin will have had as much as they can stand before long. From the moment he entered it, the wood seemed full of noises. There was a smell of damp leaves and moss, and everywhere the splash of water went whispering about. Just inside, the brook made a little fall into a pool, and the sound, enclosed among the trees, echoed as though in a cave. Roosting birds rustled overhead, the night breeze stirred the leaves, here and there a dead twig fell, and there were more sinister, unidentified sounds from further away, sounds of movement. To rabbits, everything unknown is dangerous. The first reaction is to startle, the second to bolt. Again and again they startled until they were close to exhaustion. But what did these sounds mean, and where in this wilderness could they bolt to? The rabbits crept closer together. Their progress grew slower. Before long they lost the course of the brook, slipping across the moonlit patches as fugitives, and halting in the bushes with raised ears and staring eyes. The moon was low now, and the light, wherever it slanted through the trees, seemed thicker, older, and more yellow. From a thick pile of dead leaves beneath a holly tree, Hazel looked down at a narrow path lined on either side with fern and sprouting fireweed. The fern moved slightly in the breeze, but along the path there was nothing to be seen except a scatter of last year's fallen acorns under the oak. What was in the bracken? What lay round the further bend? And what would happen to a rabbit who left the shelter of the holly tree and ran down the path? He turned to Dandelion beside him. "You'd better wait here," he said. "When I get to the bend, I'll stamp. But if I run into trouble, get the others away." Without waiting for an answer, he ran into the open and down the path. A few seconds brought him to the oak. He paused a moment, staring around him, and then ran on to the bend. Beyond, the path was the same, empty in the darkening moonlight, and leading gently downhill into the deep shadows of a grove of ilex trees. Hazel stamped, and a few moments later Dandelion was beside him in the bracken. Even in the midst of his fear and strain, it occurred to him that Dandelion must be very fast. He had covered the distance in a flash. "Well done," whispered Dandelion. "Running our risks for us, are you? Like El-ahrairah?" Hazel gave him a quick, friendly glance. It was warm praise and cheered him. What Robin Hood is to the English and John Henry to the... In the book, the word is to the American Negroes, but we don't use that term anymore because it's offensive. El-ahrairah, or El-ahrairah, or El-ahrairah, the prince with 1,000 enemies, is to rabbits. Uncle Remus might well have heard of him, for some of El-ahrairah's adventures are those of Brer Rabbit. For that matter, Odysseus himself might have borrowed a trick or two from the rabbit hero, for he is very old and was never at a loss for tricks to deceive his enemies. Once, so they say, he had to get home by swimming across a river in which there was a large and hungry pike. El-ahrairah combed himself until he had enough fur to cover a clay rabbit, which he pushed into the water. The pike rushed at it, bit it, and left it in disgust. After a little it drifted to the bank, and El-ahrairah dragged it out and waited a while before pushing it in again. After an hour of this, the pike left it alone, and when it had done so for the 5th time, El-ahrairah swam across himself and went home. Some rabbits say he controls the weather, because the wind, the damp, and the dew are friends and instruments to rabbits against their enemies. Hazel, we'll have to stop here, said Bigwig, coming up between the panting, crouching bodies of the others. I know it's not a good place, but Fiver and this other half-sized fellow you've got here, they're pretty well all in. They won't be able to go on if we don't rest. The truth was that every one of them was tired. Many rabbits spend all their lives in the same place and never run more than 100 yards at a stretch, even though they may live and sleep above ground for months at a time.
100 yards?
It's only 300 feet. It's not very far. Even though they may live and sleep above ground for months at a time, they prefer not to be out of distance of some sort of refuge that will serve for a hole. They have 2 natural gaits, the gentle lolloping forward movement of the warren on a summer evening, and the lightning dash for cover that every human has seen at some time or other. It is difficult to imagine a rabbit plodding steadily on. They're not built for it. It is true that young rabbits are great migrants and capable of journeying for miles, but they do not take to it readily. Hazel and his companions had spent the night doing everything that came unnaturally to them, and this for the first time. They had been moving in a group, or trying to. Actually, they had straggled wildly at times. They had been trying to maintain a steady pace between hopping and running, and it had come hard. Since entering the wood, they had been in severe anxiety. Several were almost thorn, that is, in that state of staring, glazed paralysis that comes over terrified or exhausted rabbits, so that they sit and watch their enemies, weasels or humans, approach to take their lives. Pipkin sat trembling under a fern, his ears drooping on either side of his head. He held one paw forward in an awkward, unnatural way and kept licking it miserably. Fiver was little better off. He still looked cheerful, but very weary. Hazel realized that until they were rested, they would all be safer where they were than stumbling along in the open with no strength left to run from an enemy. But if they lay brooding, unable to feed or go underground, all their troubles would come crowding into their hearts. Their fears would mount. It's okay, you can cross. And they might very likely scatter or even try to return to the warren. He had an idea. Yes, all right, we'll rest here, he said. Let's go in among this fern. Come on, Dandelion, tell us a story. I know you're handy that way. Pipkin here can't wait to hear it. Dandelion looked at Pipkin and realized what it was that Hazel was asking him to do. Choking back his own fear of the desolate, grassless woodland, the before-dawn returning owls that they could hear some way off, and the extraordinary rank animal smell that seemed to come from somewhere rather near, he began.
It's a twister. Also, can you please give me some room?
The story... Move over.
I've been sitting here.
Move over. You are in the middle of the middle cushion.
I've been sitting here the entire time.
That does not change what I asked you to do. The story of the blessing of El-ahrairah. Why should he think me cruel, or that he is betrayed? I'd have him love the thing that was before the world was made. W.B. Yeats, A Woman Young and Old. This is the story. You ready? Long ago, Frith made the world. He made all the stars too, and the world is one of the stars. He made them by scattering his droppings over the sky, and this is why the grass and the trees grow so thick on the world. Frith makes the rivers flow. They follow him as he goes through the sky, and when he leaves the sky, they look for him all night. Frith made all the animals and birds, but when he first made them, they were all the same. The sparrow and the kestrel were friends, and they both ate seeds and flies. And the fox and the rabbit were friends, and they both ate grass. And there was plenty of grass and plenty of flies, because the world was new, and Frith shone down bright and warm all day. Now, El-ahrairah was among the animals in those days, and he had many wives. He had so many wives that there was no counting them, and the wives had so many young that even Frith could not count them. And they ate the grass and the dandelions and the lettuces and the clover, and El-ahrairah was the father of them all. Bigwig growled appreciatively, and Jessica said, "It is really a shame how very sexist this book is." And after a time, went on Dandelion, after a time the grass began to grow thin, and the rabbits wandered everywhere, multiplying and eating as they went. Then Frith said to El-ahrairah, "Prince Rabbit, if you cannot control your people, I shall find ways to control them, so mark what I say." But El-ahrairah would not listen, and he said to Frith, "My people are the strongest in the world, for they breed faster and eat more than any of the other people. And this shows how much they love Lord Frith, for of all the animals, they are the most responsive to his warmth and brightness. You must realize, my lord, how important they are, and not hinder them in their beautiful lives." Frith could have killed El-ahrairah at once, but he had a mind to keep him in the world because he needed him to sport and jest and play tricks. So he determined to get the better of him, not by means of his own great power, but by means of a trick. He gave out that he would hold a great meeting, and that at that meeting he would give a present to every animal and bird, to make each one different from the rest. And all the creatures set out to go to the meeting place, but they all arrived at different times, because Frith made sure that it would happen so. And when the blackbird came, he gave him his beautiful song, and when the cow came, he gave her sharp horns and the strength to be afraid of no other creature. And so in their turn came the fox and the stoat and the weasel, and to each of them Frith gave the cunning and the fierceness and the desire to hunt and slay and eat the children of El-ahrairah. And so they went away from Frith full of nothing but hunger to kill the rabbits. Now all this time El-ahrairah was dancing and mating and boasting that he was going to Frith's meeting to receive a great gift. And at last he set out for the meeting place. But as he was going there, he stopped to rest on a soft sandy hillside. And while he was resting, over the hill came flying the dark swift, screaming as he went, "News! News! News!" For you know, this is what he has said ever since that day. So El-ahrairah called up to him and said, "What news?" "Why," said the swift, "I would not be you, El-ahrairah, for Frith has given the fox and the weasel cunning hearts and sharp teeth, and to the cat he has given silent feet and eyes that can see in the dark, and they are gone away from Frith's place to kill and devour all that belongs to El-ahrairah." And he dashed on over the hills, and at that moment El-ahrairah heard the voice of Frith calling, "Well, where is El-ahrairah? For all the others have taken their gifts and gone, and I have come to look for him." Then El-ahrairah knew that Frith was too clever for him, and he was frightened. He thought that the fox and the weasel were coming with Frith, and he turned to the face of the hill and began to dig. He dug a hole, but he had dug only a little of it when Frith came over the hill alone, and he saw El-ahrairah's bottom sticking out of the hole, and the sand flying out in showers as the digging went on. When he saw that, he called out, "My friend, have you seen El-ahrairah? For I am looking for him to give him my gift." "No," answered El-ahrairah without coming out, "I have not seen him. He is far away. He could not come." So Frith said, "Then come out of that hole, and I will bless you instead of him." "No, I cannot," said El-ahrairah. "I am busy. The fox and the weasel are coming. If you want to bless me, you can bless my bottom, for it is sticking out of the hole." All the rabbits had heard the story before, on winter nights when the cold draft moved down the worn passages and the icy wet lay in the pits of the runs below their burrows, and on summer evenings, in the grass under the red may and the sweet carrion-scented elder-bloom. Dandelion was telling it well, and even Pipkin forgot his weariness and danger and remembered instead the great indestructibility of the rabbits. Each one of them saw himself as El-ahrairah, who could be impudent to Frith and get away with it. Then, said Dandelion, Frith felt himself in friendship with El-ahrairah, who would not give up even when he thought the fox and the weasel were coming. And he said, very well, I will bless your bottom as it sticks out of the hole. Bottom, be strength and warning and speed forever, and save the life of your master. Be it so. And as he spoke, El-ahrairah's tail grew shining white and flashed like a star, and his back legs grew long and powerful, and he thumped the hillside until the very beetles fell off the grass stems. He came out of the hole and tore across the hill faster than any creature in the world, and Frith called after him, El-ahrairah, your people cannot rule the world, for I will not have it so. All the world will be your enemy, prince, with 1,000 enemies. And whenever they catch you, they will kill you. But first, they must catch you. Digger, listener, runner, prince with the swift warning. Be cunning and full of tricks, and your people shall never be destroyed. And El-ahrairah knew then that although he would not be mocked, yet Frith was his friend. And every evening when Frith has done his day's work and lies calm and easy in the red sky, El-ahrairah and his children and his children's children come out of their holes and feed and play in his sight, for they are his friends, and he has promised them that they can never be destroyed.